Hi, good morning, everybody. Wanted to welcome you today to the CSRS pre-retirement briefing. My name is Grant McMasters. I'm a retirement specialist at the Civilian Benefits Center, and we're going to go over, as it states, the CSRS retirement system and how it's going to affect you when you go to apply for retirement. Next slide, please. As you can see, there's a couple of informational pieces here for you. We've got our benefits line. We also have our email that you can reach out to. We are open Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 7:30, obviously except federal holidays. So if you do have a question, definitely go ahead and give us a call. And then we also have, next slide, please. Our portal. So this is something that you can access through a CAC-enabled computer. It is behind a wall, so make sure that the CAC's inserted. It's going to prompt you for your certificate, and then you're going to get taken straight to the OCHR private portal. From there, you can go ahead and explore just a various amount of topics, including where these slides will be located for today's briefing. So if you have any questions about that, just go ahead and head over to the portal, and then from there, you'll be able to find what you need. Now, next slide. Today's purpose is, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to go ahead and go over what the CSRS retirement system is, the general formula. Go ahead and next slide. I think I'm getting ahead of myself here, but we'll talk about the agenda. We're going to talk about eligibility, annuity computation, how health insurance, life insurance, the thrift savings plan happen in retirement, and then, of course, the actual retirement process itself. So first things first, let's go ahead and talk about our retirement eligibility. Now, one of the things that I want to get across to everybody is that this is an and situation. You must meet both your age requirement and your service requirement in order to qualify for what's called an optional retirement. Now, sometimes you'll hear it called an immediate retirement or a voluntary retirement. They all mean the same thing, but it all does start with meeting the two requirements. The first requirement is age 55 with 30 years of service. Second requirement, 60 with 20 years of service, and then age 62 with 5 years of service. And let me clarify that that's creditable service, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The VERA or DSR, which stands for Voluntary Early Retirement Authority or Discontinued Service Retirement, those are both command-driven initiatives. So it's not something that we offer here. It's something that your local command will provide to you. And typically, it's done when there's like a restructure or, stuff's getting shuffled about. And if you qualify, as you can see, for either being age 50 with 20 years of creditable civilian service or any age with 25 years of creditable civilian service, your command will let you know. The only real difference between the two, the optional, you just have to meet the years of service and you can retire. The VERA and the DSR, again, those are command-driven initiatives. So quick point is if you're in the GRB portal, and this is something that we do get a lot of questions about through the call center, and you see something that says early and it gives you a little date. That doesn't mean that you're eligible to retire early. That's just telling you the first available date that you would be potentially eligible for a VERA or a DSR. Okay, next slide. And so this is where we get into that creditable parts. We have to make sure that you have 5 years of creditable civilian service. Okay, so we'll get into the military service deposit a little bit down the line, but 5 years at a minimum has to be civilian service. You also then have to retire from a covered position, which if you're in the government and you are not a contractor or under temp time or FICA time, you're going to be in a covered position. And then, of course, for the CSRS folks, you have to be in position for at least 1 year of the 2-year period immediately preceding the retirement. So if you left and came back, all that fun stuff, there's lots of bits and pieces that goes into it, but it is one of those situations where as long as you meet the age requirement, the service requirement, and then these three little pieces, you're good to retire. And what'll happen is there's going to be a couple of things that are going to affect this, how the computation works. Go ahead, next slide, please. So We have our years of creditable civilian service. Then there's the average high three, and then there's what's called the CSRS general formula. Now, those three things are all going to be taken together to give you what your annuity payment is going to be in retirement. And I do want to stress that even though the Civilian Benefit Center will generate estimates for you, and we're going to follow all the formulas that OPM gives us, OPM is the final adjudicator of your annuity payment. So when you get an estimate, just expect that final amount to change, hopefully just a little bit, and then of course, hopefully in your favor. Okay, next slide, please. Now, when we have your application and we start processing it, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look for what's considered creditable service. Okay, there's lots of little things that can be creditable. There's a few things that aren't creditable, but more importantly, we're going to go through page by page through your EOPF. We're going to find all of this, compile your service history. We're going to look for your military service if you have any. We're also going to make sure that we find like any gaps in your service record so that we can adjust your service computation date correctly. And once we have all of that, we're going to plug it into our software and we're going to generate your numbers. And then you'll also see that we're going to use your unused sick leave. Now, this is going to happen at the tail end of everything. That's actually the final portion of the annuity computation is the sick leave, but it does get used. And we'll talk about that, further on in the briefing, but we do take that into account. Okay, next slide, please. Now, there is some stuff that is not creditable, and typically that's going to be what's called temp or FICA time. And usually that's going to be at the start of your career. Now, not always. I mean, I have seen a couple of packages where someone came on board, they were covered under a retirement system, left, came back as temp time, and then got, brought back under. So in certain circumstances, you are able to buy that time back, but each person is unique in that regards, and that's something that your retirement specialist will go over with you if they find something that you can buy back through the civilian service deposit process. There's also some services that are covered under different retirement systems. So we know CSRS and FERS. There's also, what is it, the Tennessee Valley Authority. The folks up in DC have their own retirement systems. So that time might also be potentially creditable as well. And what happens is when you go through the retirement process, your specialist is going to identify this time and then provide you with the information that you need in order to make an educated decision on if you want to, buy the eligible time back. And that's called the civilian service deposit. And usually that deposit is going to be equal to whatever the deductions were that would be potentially covered plus interest. I mean, we yeah, just remember interest. It's there. All right, next slide, please. So the big effects is it makes stuff creditable. There's, some associated penalties through the civilian, or not, I'm sorry. There's some associated penalties that'll happen if you choose not to buy back the temporary service. So as you can see on the slide, it says service performed prior to 10/1 of 1982. Now this is temporary service. This is stuff that's not considered creditable, but is potentially eligible for credit. If you make the deposit, which is the civilian service deposit, what it's going to do is it's then going to make you that particular time eligible for both credit towards the retirement annuity eligibility and towards the actual annuity itself. If you don't make the deposit, it's still going to be creditable towards your eligibility, but you're going to get penalized 10%, and this is a permanent penalty for the amount of the deposit. And part of what your retirement specialist is going to do is they're going to identify that, and they're also going to provide you with a civilian service deposit report that's going to tell you how much money you would have to, spend to buy that time towards your retirement eligibility so that you don't suffer that penalty. Next slide, please. Now we get into services performed after September 30th of 1982. The rules change a little bit. Again, same thing. If you make that deposit, it's eligible for, or I'm sorry, it's creditable for eligibility and it's creditable for the annuity. But if you don't make the deposit, it's not creditable towards meeting, or I'm sorry, it is creditable towards meeting the retirement eligibility, but you don't get any time given to the annuity computation itself. So you would just lose that time. So versus getting the 10% penalty, you just, your amount's just reduced because that service is not considered creditable. Next slide, please. Now, there's something called a redeposit service. A redeposit service will come into effect if you did a refund of your retirement contributions. And what that means is you came on board, you resigned, quit, moved on, and then you took your retirement contributions out of the system. So in order for those to count towards your retirement, again, you have to do the redeposit service. It follows the same process as the civilian service deposit. It's just you're basically buying all of that time back. Now, I'm not going to lie, for the CSRS folks, it can be very expensive. So if you've taken a refund of your retirement contributions, so if you had a break in service and you took that refund, uh, don't be surprised by the cost because it might cause a little bit of sticker shock. Next slide, please. So if, and similar to the CST process, if you've taken your refund and it was before 1991, you make the redeposit, it becomes eligible or creditable for eligibility, it becomes creditable for annuity computation. And if you don't, again, it's still creditable towards eligibility. So you will be eligible to meet, your retirement based upon that information. But now you're going to get what's called an actuarial reduction. So it's basically a fancy term that says we're going to reduce that final amount by a very long, complicated formula, and that's going to be another permanent penalty towards your annuity payment itself. So if you took the refund and you have to do a redeposit, you might have to make a decision on is it worth it? And that's part of, again, what your retirement specialist is going to do for you. They're going to make sure that you have all of the available information so that you can make that decision. Next slide, please. Similar situation here. Again, if it's after March 1st of 1991, again, if you make the redeposit, you're good to go. It's creditable towards your eligibility. It's creditable towards your annuity payment. If you don't make the redeposit, it still allows you to retire, makes you eligible, but it's basically subtracted from your total creditable time and it's not used during the calculation when we get to that final step. Next slide, please. Creditable service is also military service. So if you have military service, you can potentially purchase that back. And it's not the civilian service deposit, it's now called a military service deposit. And it does take a little bit longer to do, and we'll get into that in a few slides. But just be aware that if you have any honorable active duty military service, it is potentially creditable. And you have to go through DFAS. Okay, so let me just kind of walk you through the process. There's a lot of things that are going to go into a military service deposit. So I want to caution you, if you are planning to retire and you have military service, that military service has to be paid off prior to your date of retirement. Okay, I want to repeat that one more time. It has to be paid off. So you have to do the military service deposit prior to your date of retirement. Otherwise, it will no longer, or it's just not eligible, period. So whereas the civilian service deposit, you're kind of given a little bit of a break because when your package gets to OPM, they're going to reach out to you and ask you if you want to do this. The military service deposit, it doesn't work that way. So you may have to delay your retirement. So again, it's just a caution, an asterisk, however you want to look at it. If you've got military service, it has to have gone through the military service deposit process prior to your date of retirement. Okay. It's a long process, So if you're thinking about doing it, start it now. Okay, now the deposit again has to be made through DFAST. This is why it has to be done prior to your date of retirement, because it's not done through OPM. And certain instances, the receipt of the military retired pay is going to bar credits unless it's waived. Fancy way of saying if you're a military retiree and you purchase the time back, in order to receive the credit and have it count towards your retirement, you have to waive your military pay or the military retired pay. All right. So just there's a couple of things that are going to go into it. But again, like I mentioned, your retirement specialist is going to be the one that is going to go over all that information. They're going to make sure that you have all the necessary education so that you can make those decisions and therefore have, all the information you need to figure it all out. Next slide, please. Types of military service. This is pretty much everything that you can potentially purchase back on your or towards your CSRS retirement. Active duty military, non-retired, straightforward. That's me. I was prior Air Force. I did my military service deposit. And so now I get a little bit of extra times towards my retirement. If you are a military retiree, you can, like I mentioned, make that deposit. You just have to waive the retired pay at time of retirement. If you are a military reservist, you can buy your active duty time back, and it has to be done under Title 10 activation. So once you are active duty, you can buy that time back, and for each period of active duty time that you will have to do an individual military service deposit for that thing. So if you have lots of active duty time as a reservist, you could do it all in one fell swoop, but you just have to make sure that you get the paid in full letter. The benefit, of course, of being a reservist is you kind of get the best of both worlds. You can retire from the reserves and you can retire from the civilian sector, and you don't have to waive your retired pay. Now, I want you guys to pay attention to what's at the bottom of the slide. Okay, if retired military pay is based upon disability, combat disability, this is a big one here, and I'm just going to focus on that. If you think that your military retirement is based upon a combat disability or due to instrumentality of war, you will have to prove that. In order to prove that, you're going to have to go to your military branch's retirement board and obtain the retirement determination forms. So when your retirement board looked at all your bits and pieces, they had a determination and they issued you a letter. You will have to submit that retirement determination letter in order to prove that it's a combat related disability. Sometimes it's located on the DD-214s, but not always. In all cases, if you are claiming combat disability, you must give us that retirement disability determination letter. Okay, and that's going to come from your military branch of service. All right, next slide, please. This is a little bit complicated because this is what's effectively known as the Catch 62. Now, it's a kind of an option. It's a weird thing because under CSRS, you are not subject to Social Security. In certain instances, yes, that may be available. But if you have military time, and look at the slide, I mean, really it has everything there, and I'm just going to kind of break it down for you. If you were hired before October 1st of 1982, and at the age of 62, you become eligible for Social Security, and you meet both those things, you're going to fall under that catch 22 where it is creditable. So your service is just considered creditable. You don't have to make the deposit. But the kicker is if you don't make the deposit at age 62, when you become eligible for Social Security, your CSRS annuity is going to be reduced by a certain amount, and your military time is no longer going to be used for your annuity purpose or for the annuity purposes. So it's complicated. I'm not going to lie. If we have folks that are in this particular situation, definitely reach out to the benefits line. Your retirement specialist will be able to assist you with this and determine if you fall into this particular category or not. But again, I just want to stress here, hired before 1982, eligible for Social Security at 62, and you have military service. If you fall into those three categories, a whole new thing gets introduced for you. We'll get you through it. We know what we're doing. We'll make sure everything's taken care of. But just if you fall into that, give a call to the benefits line, and that way we can go over it with you. All right, next slide, please. Now, this is going to be if you're after 1982, pretty straightforward. If you make the deposit, it's eligible for, or it's creditable for your eligibility, and you get it on the annuity comp. If you don't make the deposit, you don't get it. It's not creditable for eligibility, and it's not creditable for the annuity. So that one's a little bit, more straightforward, nice and simple. We like simple. I like simple. Next slide, please. So now we get into the fun part, because now we're going to talk about how to do the actual military service deposit. It takes time. The bottom of the slide says it takes approximately 120 business days. I'm just going to let you know, bake in about 6 months, because that's a good safe window to operate from. Because what you actually have to do is, the first step is reaching out to DFAS. Okay, you have to request what's called your estimated earnings during military pay. They're going to want you to submit that RI 20-97, and then you have to make sure that you provide them with the member 4 copies of the DD-214. Now, if you've only got one period of service, then you've got one DD-214. If you were a reservist, you may have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, however many times you were activated. You have to submit all copies of those member 4 DD-214s in order to get credit for it. So if you don't, we know what happens. What they're going to do then is they're going to generate this estimated earnings report, and then they're going to send it to you. Now, they have 30 to 45 days. Just figure 45 days. It'll be safer. I'm going to under promise all these dates and push them out as far as I can. Hopefully DFAS is going to over deliver for us and get you that estimated earning reports sooner rather than later. Now, after you've got the estimated earnings report, you're going to download the SF2803 and the 2803 Alpha, and you're going to fill that out. You're going to send the filled out application plus all of your DD-214s again, plus the estimated earnings report, and you're going to bring that over to us at the Civilian Benefits Center, and your retirement specialist is going to calculate out the amount of money that you're going to owe in order to gain this time towards your retirement. Once we have generated that report, we will then provide you with a copy, and we're going to send that information up to DFAS. Now, this particular portion, yeah, it's potentially up to about 120 days. Once DFAS gets all of that information, so they get our report, again, we're sending them your DD-214s, the estimated earnings, we're certifying everything. They're going to reach out to you, and they're going to basically arrange for you to make a payment. Now, from what I understand, this is done through what pay.gov, I think, is their preferred method. Once you make the payment, and you have 2 ways of doing it, you can do a full, just one-shot payment, or you can do payroll deduction. Once that amount's been paid off, they are then going to generate what's called a paid in full letter, or PIF. That paid in full letter is going to be loaded into your MyPay. So previously they would email it to you, or they would send it to you in the mail itself. Now they're loading it into MyPay. And once you have that paid in full letter, it is now your responsibility to make sure that that paid in full letter gets loaded to your EOPF through your local HROs. And when you retire, make sure that you submit that paid in full letter with your retirement package, just in case. Because as with everything in retirement, if you don't provide the proof, OPM will not give you the credit. So again, let me just repeat that one more time. If you do a military service deposit, make sure you give us the paid in full letter, so this way we can get it up to OPM so you can get the credit towards your retirement. Uh, Again, like I said, the slide says it's about 120 business days. That's for the first half of the process. For instance, with me, I did a payroll deduction. So when I first came on board, the folks over, I was with the Department of the VA, and my HRO was super proactive, and they're like, "Hey, you're in the military. We need to get you to do the buyback. So let's go ahead and get this process started." So I was lucky. I'm not gonna lie, I was super lucky in the fact that I had a very, like I said, proactive HR department, and they kind of hounded me until I did the process, which I'm really glad that they did. So I did the payroll deduction, and my payroll deduction, I just did $50 out of each pay period across the course of 2.5 years. So for me, the process lasted almost 3 years. If you do it in one payment, it's still going to get back to them. So anytime you're interfacing with DFAST, just figure 30 to 45 business days for them to do issue a response. So once we give them, the report, 30 to 45 business days before they contact you. Once you pay it off, 30 to 45 business days before they contact you and notify you that the paid in full letter is available. That's why I'm saying bake in an extra 6 months if you're doing this at the end of your career. Because the last thing that we want to have to tell you as a specialist is go, "Hey, Mr. Smith, we noticed that you've got some military time. If you want to do this, you're going to have to delay your retirement from December of 2023 potentially out until June of 2024." I don't like having those uncomfortable conversations. I don't like having to give people that are ready to retire bad news. So if you think you're doing it, give yourself adequate time. All right, next slide, please. Now, the sick leave conversion, I really appreciate the fact that we are given this sick leave conversion because in non-government sectors, sick leave just goes away. It just disappears. It doesn't do anything for you. Whereas with us, we get a nice little added extra bonus. The government is nice enough to give us credit for our sick leaves for annuity computation purposes only. I'm not going to complain about being a healthy individual and then I get rewarded at the tail end of my career with a little bit of extra money on my annuity payment. I'm totally cool with that. It's great. Just I think it's fantastic. This is one of the few things that I'm like, yes, I love it. But so how it works is it's converted to years, months, and days. And I just want to make sure, look at that third bullet because there's a little caveat to that. In OPM land, it converts over at a rate of 6 hours equals 1 day of credit towards your annuity payment. If you go to take a day of sick leave, you take 8 hours. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is where it becomes important. This is the sick leave conversion chart. So as we're looking at this chart with a bunch of numbers on it, we have months and days, and then we have just random numbers in between. Those are your sick leave hours. If you can't find your exact sick leave hours, you're just going to go to the next highest amount. So let's say you have 1,115 sick hours on the book at time of retirement. Well, if you look towards the middle of the screen, you're going to see 113 or 1,113 and then 1,119. Since you're not at 1,115, you're just going to step up to the next one, which will take us to 1,119. And then you're going to get 6 months and 13 days worth of credit towards your annuity payment. Now, I want you to go ahead and look at 174 hours. That equals 1 month's worth of credits. So I get plenty of phone calls from our call center asking us how much sick leave do I have to have on the books to get 1 month's worth of credit? 174 hours. If you dip below that amount, you lose the month and whatever days are washed. Because, next slide, when OPM does the conversion, 6 hours per 1 day, They add it together with your creditable civilian time, and then once they're done with that, those days get washed. They're gone. Think about it like, long division. It's the remainder. Well, for the purposes of calculating your annuity, they just toss those days. So once the conversion is done, you lose out on whatever days that are left over. So please be careful when you're taking sick leave to not dip below whatever that month mark is, because it could cost you a potential change in your annuity payment. And a lot of people, we do get plenty of phone calls at the CBC where they're asking us, hey, how does this work? I'll let you know, we're not allowed to tell you how many sick hours you can take. All we're going to do is walk you right to that chart, let you know, and say, remember, 6 hours per 1 day. So just be aware of that. But again, the nice thing is, and this is again where I truly appreciate the fact that we are at least given credit towards our annuity if we have extra sick leave on the books. Okay, next slide, please. Well, let's talk about the good stuff now. And this is going to be your average high 3. Okay, the average high 3 is basically used, well, it's not basically used, it is used to determine the amount that's going to be multiplied against to get your actual annuity payment. Now, what we're going to do is we typically will take the 3 highest consecutive earning years, and this is more often than not, it's going to be at the end of a career. Okay, there are instances where it can be in the middle. There are instances where I've seen it almost towards the beginning of somebody's career. I mean, they didn't stay with us for very long, but they met all the requirements. And you'll see, and the reason why is it includes the locality pay. So usually it's at the tail end of the career. More often than not, people started out, the $20,000 a year and they end up at $150,000 a year. Obviously, there's going to be a big difference, and we're going to use those final 3 years. But the locality pay, and this is how your average high 3 is or what's included in it, it includes that locality pay. So let's say you were up in DC and then you moved to Ohio. Well, the locality is super different. So that's why we might find your high 3, towards the middle of your career versus at the end. But they all are calculated the same way. We're looking for the 3 highest consecutive earning years. And then it includes the locality pay. If you are a wage grade employee, it includes your nighttime differential. If you're a firefighter or a Leo, it includes that pay as well, that premium pay. It doesn't include any night differentials for GS employees. So if you're a GS equivalent, it doesn't add to it. And then, of course, bonuses, allowances, or overtime pay, those are not counted as well. Okay, next slide. All right, this is a lot of numbers. Now, I will admit, I can calculate your high 3 by hand. I don't ever want to have to do it by hand. We have a program for it. I'm very thankful for that. And what it is think of your average high 3, it's a weighted aggregate of the amount of time you spend in each pay period that's averaged out across 3 years. So you can see on this chart, I mean, this is the exact same form I would fill out if I had to do it by hand, but you can see that, say, like the very first, line is from May 1st of 2019 to January 13th of 2020. You earned, your annual rate was $58,918. You were in that pay band for 8 months and 13 days, which then gets converted to a time factor, which means that the amount of time you spent, you earned $41,406. So part of the process that we go through on a service history review is we're going to find every pay change that happens during those average or during that consecutive high 3 years. And then we're going to follow the chart. We're going to plug in the numbers. We're going to get the time factor. We're going to add it all up. And then we're going to divide it by 3. And then that number, that average, is what's used to calculate your annuity payments. All right, next slide. Now, the CSRS general formula is a little bit different because it actually has 3 different steps to it. So your first 5 years, you get a multiplier of 1.5%. Your second 5 years, the multiplier becomes 1.75%, and then any remaining years and months after that gets multiplied by 2%, add it all together, and then that's how they come up with what your actual annuity payment is going to be. So again, I mean, I can do this by hand. I really don't want to. I love my computer program because it makes my life so much easier. And it's also, I'll freely admit, it's a little bit more accurate than me. I mean, I'm prone to making mistakes. Who isn't? We're all human, right? But this formula, coupled with your creditable service, coupled with your annual or your average high three, is how you're going to get what your annuity payment's going to look like. Okay, now there are special retirement plans. There are other work schedules that may use different formulas, but if you are a pure CSRS employee, this is the formula that you're going to fall under. Okay, next slide. That gets us the number. There are reductions. Just be aware of that things can adjust that amount. The first thing is that if you did qualify for a VERA or a DSR and you are under the age of 55, there is a 2% reduction per year that you're under that age. Now, again, it's going to be a permanent reduction because just of how the laws are written and how everything works out. But if you're offered that VERA and you're under a certain age, just be aware there's going to be a little bit of subtraction. And then if you have deposit service prior to 10/1/82, any deposit service performed before that date, and you choose not to pay it off, it will incur a permanent 10% penalty based upon that deposit amount. So let's say you owe $200, right? That means that your penalty is going to be $20 per month. So again, that's a permanent penalty. Just kind of be aware of that fact. All of that fun stuff will be included on your estimate report. Don't worry about it. And of course, your retirement specialist will go over this with you and they'll walk you through what all the numbers mean on the estimates. Okay, next slide, please. Now, again, we're going to see that there's also a reduction for a survivor's annuity. Now, I haven't really talked about the survivor's annuity yet, but be aware that you can elect to leave a survivor's annuity to a spouse or, well, more often than not, it'll be a spouse, but you can also leave it to an insurable interest and that's a little bit more complicated, but we'll get into it. Just understand that the survivor's annuity is 55% of the base that you've selected. Okay. The base amount is whatever dollar amount you choose multiplied by 55%. Okay, next slide, please. This is where you can see how that works. So let's say your full annuity comes out to $45,000, $886 per year. The monthly, now that's your annual annuity. That's not divided by 12. Your monthly survivor annuity is going to be, $2,103. And then of course it's going to cost you approximately $360 per month to do. Now, you as CSRS employees have the option to select any amount that you want as a base. The biggest reason why you're going to want to have a survivor's annuity is that if you have a survivor's annuity and you pass away and you have health care, so you've taken your FEHB into retirement, your spouse or whomever you elect for the survivor's annuity can continue that health care because it will be paid, the premiums for that health care are going to be paid out of the survivor annuity. Now, that's any amount. So you can select the minimum, but just be aware that whatever balance is not paid by the annuity, your survivor or your insurable interest will have to cover that cost through OPM. More importantly, no survivor annuity, no FEHB coverage for the person you've selected. So just kind of keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Now, insurable interest. This is one of those funny little things. You don't have to select a survivor's annuity or your spouse as your survivor's annuity. Let's say you're divorced or widowed, or you've just never been married and you want to give somebody an annuity payment, so a survivor's annuity, and let's say maybe it's your brother or a kid. So you can elect them to do that. There are some things that qualify you. So they have to reasonably expect to derive financial benefit from your continued life. Basically, you have to be healthy. Okay, you can't go, oh, well, I'm, stage 4 terminal cancer. I'm electing a survivor annuity, so this person gets that. They're not going to let that happen. I mean, you are going to have to provide medical reports at your expenses stating that you're a healthy individual. You're going to have to provide, again, reasonable financial benefit to this person from you continuing to be alive. If you do that and OPM's totally okay with it, then they're going to get 55% of your annuity, but the cost is going to be based upon the difference between you and the insurable interest. So it can get expensive. I mean, it's between 10 to 40%. It can get really pricey. If it is something, again, that you want to do and you want to explore that, then please talk with your retirement specialist about it. Ask them to run the numbers for you. They'll be more than happy to do so. So at least this way you can have an idea on what it is you're looking at if you want to do the insurable interest. Okay, next slide. There's also, and this is where we're continuing along with the reduction portion. There's also going to be a potential reduction for a redeposit service. So we talked about it a little bit. Now you're going to kind of see what happens. This is that actuarial reduction. And again, like I mentioned, that formula is complicated, but yay, computer programs. I'm going to just stress how much I love having my computer to help me out with this. But if you have a redeposit service and you haven't paid it off, this will be a permanent reduction to your annuity payment based upon the amount that you owe and your age at retirement. Um, I think I've seen maybe like 3 of these so far. So again, everybody's circumstance is unique. If you have questions, chat it up with your retirement specialist. They'll work with you to figure out what's going to happen for you. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, good. Now we get to talk about potential additions. So enough, we're not going to take any money away. We're going to potentially add stuff to it. So I did see a question in chat, and it talked about the maximum benefits for a CSRS annuitant. So your maximum benefits 41 years and 11 months. So that's the maximum amount of credit you can get. Now, I'm not taking into account sick leave. This is just you've worked enough to earn 41 years and 11 months towards your annuity payment. Well, let's say you continue to work past that. Okay, you're still contributing to the retirement system. So even though you've maxed out your credit, and as a matter of fact, I had somebody, he had been working for 56 years. Yeah, 56 years under CSRS. So what do they do with all of those extra contributions? Well, it's still sitting in the system. You're still eligible for it, but what's going to happen if you can only get a maximum of 41 years and 11 months of your annuity? Well, you're going to be offered something called it's a voluntary additional annuity that's purchased through OPM. So OPM will reach out to you at this point, but just be aware that for every $100 you put in for this additional annuity, you get a $7 return. Okay, so if you have excess contributions, every $100 you put in gets you $7 out. Now, if you choose not to do it, they issue you a refund, and that's all part of the retirement process. OPM will get you squared away and make sure you get the right amount. But if you've worked over 41 years and 11 months, you have the option to purchase an additional annuity. Now it's in addition to, so it's actually, I believe they give you a second deposit. I haven't had anybody call me back yet. That's just what I've been told. All right, next slide. Now we have our withholdings, the typical stuff. We've got taxes, health insurance premiums, life insurance premiums. Now, I should mention that this is all post, so all of these deductions now are post-tax. Prior to this, everything was pre-tax. So you have your gross amount, then you get your pre-tax deductions, then your post-tax deductions, then you get your net amount. Okay. Federal taxes, your annuity is subject to federal taxes. So you're going to fill out what's called the W-4P form and submit that with your retirement application. If you have any health insurance premiums or life insurance premiums, those are also going to be deducted from your retirement annuity. And then if your state taxes your annuity payment, you will be given a chance once you gain your what's called the civil service annuitant number to set up your state taxes, because you'll have to pay those taxes. So all that stuff's going to come out of your annuity payment. Dental and vision, just kind of want to give you guys a heads up. If you have dental and vision, what'll happen is you'll have to cover the cost of those premiums until your annuity payment is finalized, and then they'll get folded into the annuity as well. Okay, next slide. All right, election options, good stuff. So when you, again, this boils down to your survivor annuity. If you're just going to do you, so actually, let me throw this out there. If you do any other survivor annuity other than the full amount, you must submit a spousal consent form. For CSRS employees, it's the SF 2801-2. And that form has to be filled out by your spouse and notarized. It also has to be absolutely perfect. Okay, you cannot have any mistakes, corrections, errors, anything with that form, because OPM will not accept it, and we will be asked, or we'll have to ask you to go get a new form notarized. Now, this is at your expense. I mean, don't get me wrong, the notary process is maybe $5, but I don't want you to have to spend any additional money. So please, if you're going to do anything other than the full amount, just understand you have to have an additional form with you. Remember, if you're doing self only, so basically your annuity only pays out while you're alive, your survivor does not gain access to health benefits after you pass, which is why I'm always going to encourage you to do some form of survivor annuity. Even if they choose not to do the health benefits, at least they have that option. Okay. And the other thing, and this will come in the second half of the briefing when my companion starts to talk about it. But once you've waived your FEHB benefits, they never come back. So think very hard on that before you decide to do anything around that. Again, anything other than the full survivor annuity, you have to have that SF 2801-2 form filled out and notarized. Next slide. Your amount is always going to be 55%. So if it's 55% of your full annuity, or it's 55% of whatever base amount you've selected, or if there's a court order. So it's always going to be 55% of whatever that particular number is. Just be aware of that fact. Again, the benefit for the CSRS employees is you can actually select how much you want, which means you're in control of what that amount's going to potentially be. And don't be afraid to ask your retirement specialist to work with you to figure out, hey, if I select this as my base, what's my survivor annuity going to look like? So reach out to him if you have questions. If you get me, then I'm more than happy to take the time, to walk you through this so that you're making the best decision possible. All right. And next slide, please. And this is just kind of a little bit of the math on how it's going to work. So if you have a base of $50,000, and this is a yearly, so keep in mind this is yearly, this is not monthly, then your base is going to be that $27,500, which is 55% of that base amount. And then, of course, your annuity is going to be reduced again through another formula by a certain amount each year. So just I like the fact that we do this and that we have this available to us, even though it's a little bit more complicated on the back end. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to, have a survivor's annuity like this to take care of our loved ones after the fact. But remember, whatever base you select is going to be 55% of that amount. And then based upon that amount is how we're going to calculate out how much it's going to cost you per year. Okay, next slide. Okay, same thing. Again, if you elect less than that full amount, so let's say you elect $3,600, 55% is going to be $1,980, and then per year it's going to cost you $90. So divide 90 by 12, that's how much your monthly cost is going to be. Even though it's maybe what, $8, a little bit less than $8, it still means that your spouse is eligible to retain those FEHB benefits. So it's pretty awesome. Any amount towards your survivor's annuity will allow your spouse eligibility for health benefits, FEHB stuff. Next slide. Hey, look at that. Has any questions in the chat? I see everybody's been getting answered pretty quickly. Anything you guys would like me to go over, go ahead and speak up. If not, we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. Let's see, I see. What happens to the money that goes into the CSRS account that you pay as shown on your LES? Now, I don't know if I have enough information to answer that question just because it depends a lot on how many years you've got in service. So if we're talking about the full 41 years and 11 months, anything in excess of that, basically OPM holds on to until retirement, and then that's where they're going to give you the option of doing that additional annuity or getting the refund. If it's less than the 41 years, whatever your contributions are to the retirement system, that's how they determine, that's used towards actually the annuity payment itself. So there's not enough there for me to really give you a good answer on. I don't know who put that out there, but if you are not sure, contact the benefits line and someone will reach out to you and answer that question for you. And I think that's it. Everything else has been taken care of by the folks that are moderating our chat. So let's go ahead and we'll take a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, my partner Donna is going to go ahead and go over FEHB, FEGLI, and the actual retirement process itself.